Hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Clinton Tyson and my presentation is SOAP versus REST Web Services. A developer preference. Today we're going to talk about the differences between SOAP and REST Web Services and why a developer may choose either technology to build a web application. So with that, we'll get started. What is a web service? Well, that's a good question. A web service is a method of communication between two electronic devices over the internet. For example, smartphones, tablets, PCs, etc. It follows the client-server architecture. For those of you that don't know what a client-server architecture is, you may want to look that up. But most of you probably do, seeing as how you're in the IT field. But I will not explain what it is. That's outside of the scope of this presentation, so we will continue. SOAP and REST are the two major types of web services. The types of data SOAP and REST consume are primarily JSON and XML. What are SOAP and REST web services? We'll start with SOAP. SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. SOAP is an XML-based industry standard protocol for designing and developing web services. Since it is XML-based, it is platform and language independent. So it can be used in a program running in one kind of operating system to communicate with a program in the same or different kind of operating system. So what that means basically is that XML can be read between any two operating systems. It could be the same type of operating system or it could be different. So it primarily uses HTTP protocol for sending and receiving data and uses XML as the format to encapsulate that data so that data can be processed. So now we'll talk a little bit about REST. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. REST is an architectural style for developing applications that can be accessed via a URI over HTTP or HTTPS protocol by way of a web browser. Web browsers use GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE methods. They're native to the HTTP protocol. REST is a stateless client-server architecture where the web service can be identified by their URIs. For example, http://myRESTAPI.com/users/ID would return a specific user in XML or JSON format. Typically, JSON is returned. It's the most popular. It's more lightweight than XML. It is easily parsed by the browser with JavaScript. So typically, that is the specific format that developers choose to use if they're going to implement a REST web service. But XML can be used. So that's just a good thing to know about REST. REST is also used over HTTPS protocol to send and retrieve data. Compared to SOAP, REST is lightweight and doesn't follow any standard. REST web services can use XML, JSON, text, or any other types of data for request and response. XML and JSON are the most popular types of data used with REST web services. Now we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages between SOAP and REST web services. First, we'll start with the fundamental differences between SOAP and REST web services. SOAP is a protocol, while REST is an architectural style. It is not a protocol. SOAP is network bandwidth intensive since it uses verbose XML to encapsulate the data for communication, while REST is lightweight since it uses JSON most of the time. SOAP is bound by a contract between client and server, making it rigid, while REST is flexible and scalable and not bound by a contract between client and server. SOAP has additional features such as WS security, which REST does not have. REST relies on HTTPS security, and security can be customized at the application level if desired. So basically, that's a huge difference. SOAP provides built-in security, and REST does not. However, uh, REST can be secured in other ways at the application level, as I just mentioned, or you can just use HTTPS security, which is most of the time is enough. So now we'll move to the next. Okay, first, we're going to talk about the advantages that SOAP may have over REST. Using SOAP over HTTP allows for easier communication through proxies and firewalls. I'm not going to get into the technicality of that. You just should know that it's easier to use SOAP through proxies and firewalls. SOAP is platform independent, meaning it doesn't rely on a specific platform to send or receive data. Uh, it is also programming language independent, meaning you can implement SOAP using Java, C Sharp, C++, Perl, PHP, etc. SOAP is versatile enough to allow for the use of different transport protocols. The standard way of using SOAP uses HTTP as the transport protocol. However, it is possible to use SMTP, which is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, or RSS protocols. Now we'll talk about the disadvantages that SOAP may have. Uh, SOAP can be considerably slower due to its large payload of its XML format. It does not support the JSON format, which is more lightweight than XML, as we discussed earlier. SOAP has a tight coupling between the client and server. REST web services has loose coupling, meaning REST isn't dependent upon the client or server, and it's not bound by any contract like SOAP is. Anytime there's a change in this is an example of the coupling. Anytime there's a change in the WSDL, which is pronounced WSDL, stands for Web Service Description Language. And anytime there's a change in the WSDL and the client-side files associated with SOAP need to be regenerated. So that can get process intensive, a pain in the butt for developers. If they even need to make a simple change, then you would have to regenerate all the client-side files associated with the SOAP service. Now we're going to talk about choosing between SOAP and REST web services. Uh, we'll talk about some features of SOAP. Provider creates and implements a web service interface onto an existing application. The provider creates a WSDL contract in order to distribute the web service details to potential consumers. The consumer obtains WSDL contract for consumption. Consumer implements the WSDL in a specific platform, for example, Java, C Sharp, C++, PHP, Perl, etc. It's we talked about a minute ago is programming language independent. And the consumer creates an application to call the service of one of those programming languages. Now we'll talk about REST. REST has become one of the most popular technologies for web applications. Every major programming language now includes frameworks for building REST web services. REST is used to build web services that are lightweight, maintainable, and scalable. REST web services rely on and use HTTP protocol as a supporting protocol. REST is a good fit for browser-based interactions, and this goes back to using JSON as easily consumed and parsed with JavaScript within the web browser. Developers are finding it difficult to scale their SOAP web services, and they are gradually adopting REST even for enterprise application development, where security features of SOAP are desired. They are still finding REST a viable option alternative to SOAP. REST is seen as a great alternative to SOAP, to the point when bandwidth and scalability, are concerns for their web application. Now we'll talk a little bit about REST versus SOAP when trying to decide what technology you want to use if you're a developer. Simple changes to WSDL requires that contract between the client and server gets regenerated to ensure that the SOAP web service still works. SOAP web services architecture is rigid, making scalability an issue for large applications. REST is used to build web services that are lightweight, maintainable, and scalable. The development with SOAP can get complex if the developer wants to add new features to their application. Testing is not easy with SOAP, while testing is much simpler with REST. REST web services are recommended for developers who need their web services scalable and lightweight. And REST is quickly becoming more popular than SOAP primarily because of these aspects. Majority of the uh, chose defense as their answer, defense sector, uh, and there was one response for insurance. What is your job title? That's the next question, and basically these job titles are just titles. Most of these jobs here share the same responsibilities. I was just curious as to what their title was. Next question was, what area of development are you involved with at your current position? And for the majority of the responses, they chose architecture. So that was interesting. Typically, uh, developers that deal with architectural um, responsibilities within their job are high on the totem pole, if you will. They've been there a long time. That they're past the interface database stage, and now they're doing both. And so they have been doing development for a while. The next question was, how old are you? And the majority of people that took my survey are 34 to 41 years old. The next question was, are you male or female? The majority of the people that took my survey are male, with one female. What is your highest level of education you have completed? And all of my responses chose they had graduated with a bachelor's degree. So now we'll talk about, or I'll go through some of the questions that were asked that were more technical and had more to do with REST versus SOAP. Which web service technology do you think has faster return responses? The majority chose REST. I'm not sure about the one that chose SOAP, but typically speaking, REST has faster return responses. What web service does your company currently employ? This was interesting as well. I know we have some REST services at our company. I'm not sure. Maybe the company down the street that I asked some developers to respond to this survey. Maybe they chose SOAP, and a lot of people just chose unsure because they weren't sure uh, what technology or if they had any web services. It's just anyway, we'll move on from that one. When an application needs to conserve bandwidth, which web service do you think is better to implement because it uses less bandwidth? And the majority chose REST, which would be a correct answer. Maybe the people that choose SOAP are just more comfortable with SOAP, and they haven't, they don't view REST as a viable alternative. Maybe because they don't know about REST enough to even to try it out. So the next question: when building a web application, which web service do you think is easier to use because of better support of browser clients? And as we were talking about earlier in this presentation, REST uses JSON, which is easily parsable with JavaScript within the browser. So everybody got that one, or chose REST. Let's see. If you were developing a public API, which web service technology do you think would be easier for both developers and web browsers to consume it? Most people chose REST. Which web service technology do you think is good for applications that require formal contracts? The WSDLs that we talked about a little bit earlier between the API and the consumer. Uh, Here, everybody chose SOAP because SOAP uses a WSDL. So which web service technology do you think employs WS reliable messaging to increase security for asynchronous execution and processing? Um, this was talked about a little bit in the survey description, so I'm assuming that uh, people chose SOAP because of that, and which is correct. If you were building a web application that requires state management between requests, what web service technology would you choose? And most everyone knows from earlier in the presentation that REST is stateless. So most people chose SOAP. And one person chose Enterprise Java Beans, which was outside of the scope of the question. I was probably trying to be funny or something. If operational contract and security were the most important aspects of your web application, which web service technology would you choose to build your application? And as we talked about earlier with the WSDL, SOAP employs a contract and has built-in security, so most people chose SOAP. If performance and scalability were the most important aspects of your application, which web service technology would you choose to build your application? And most people chose, well, everybody chose REST. Next question, has your company migrated from SOAP to REST or vice versa? And everybody either chose no or unsure. It was 50-50. But there were no yeses. So I thought that was interesting. Uh, Next question. What do you think should be considered in a migration from SOAP to REST? This was a question where you can choose multiple answers, obviously. But for the most part, time was the most important, or people thought that time was the most important choice to consider in a migration from SOAP to REST. Thank you for your time. This concludes my presentation. I hope this presentation helped you understand the differences between SOAP and REST web services and why a programmer would choose either technology for developing web applications. If you have any questions, please post on the discussion board in D2L. Thank you.